U.S. President Donald Trump abruptly shifted course on his tariff policy once again, announcing a 90-day pause on his reciprocal tariffs for many countries around the world. Initially, the White House stated that Canada would remain subject to a new 10% baseline tariff under the revised framework. However, that position was quickly reversed, and ultimately no new tariffs were applied to Canadian goods for the time being. Although Canada was excluded from the initial round of relief, it has avoided an immediate escalation in trade tensions. Still, the episode underscores the persistent uncertainty clouding the U.S.-Canada trade relationship, particularly as Washington continues to treat Ottawa differently than its other traditional allies. Now, a few months after the start of rising tensions between Canada and the United States, the economic impacts are beginning to be felt on both sides of the border. What once seemed like political posturing has turned into real consequences for businesses, workers, and consumers. Since February, a wave of new statistics has emerged offering a clearer picture of how trade and cross-border commerce have been affected. These numbers not only highlight the immediate fallout but also raise serious concerns about the long-term effects if the dispute continues on its current path. In March 2025, Canadian resident return trips by automobile from the U.S. dropped by 31.9% compared to the same month in 2024. This marked the third consecutive monthly decline following a 23% drop in February. Air travel experienced a similar, albeit less dramatic, dip, with year-over-year Canadian return trips by air falling by 13.5%. Perhaps most striking is the collapse in flight bookings between the two countries, which have plummeted by an estimated 70% compared to the previous year. This sharp decline in cross-border movement is driven largely by a combination of economic grievances and political tensions. The imposition of tariffs by the U.S. on Canadian exports sparked a tit-for-tat trade dispute, prompting retaliatory measures from Canada. The resulting climate has fueled a rise in Canadian nationalism, with many consumers opting to boycott American goods and travel destinations. At the same time, inflammatory political rhetoric, such as remarks from U.S. leadership joking about Canada becoming the 51st state, has deepened public resentment and eroded trust. Compounding these issues are official travel advisories from the Canadian government warning citizens about increased border scrutiny and potential digital privacy violations while entering the U.S. These alerts, alongside anecdotal reports of harsh immigration enforcement, have led many Canadians to feel unwelcome and even unsafe traveling south. The economic fallout from this slump in travel is significant. The U.S. Travel Association has warned that even a 10% decline in Canadian tourism could result in a $2.1 billion loss in spending and approximately 14,000 jobs. The effects are already being felt in tourism-dependent areas. Palm Springs, California, known for welcoming roughly 300,000 Canadian visitors annually, contributing an estimated $300 million to the local economy, has responded to the downturn with public relations efforts, including signs that Red Palm Springs loves Canada in an attempt to ease diplomatic tensions and woo back tourists. Similar anxieties are playing out in U.S. border towns such as Plattsburgh, New York, where Canadian visitors are an essential part of the local economy. Business owners there are reporting steep drops in revenue, and local officials are bracing for deeper, more lasting impacts if the travel slump continues. The airline industry has not been immune either. Carriers like Air Canada have reduced flights to various U.S. destinations by as much as 10%, while major U.S. airlines have revised their revenue forecasts downward amid softening demand. With consumer confidence shaken and cross-border uncertainty on the rise, airlines are being forced to re-evaluate route planning and resource allocation. Public sentiment in Canada mirrors this broader cooling of enthusiasm for travel to the U.S. A recent Ipsos poll found that nearly half of Canadians are now less inclined to visit their southern neighbor. Many are instead choosing to vacation within Canada or explore international destinations that feel more politically stable and culturally welcoming. Shifting from travel to trade, let's explore how the Canadian boycott of American goods is reshaping multiple industries. The Canadian boycott of U.S. goods, sparked by retaliatory tariffs and escalating political tensions, has significantly disrupted multiple American industries. One of the most immediately affected sectors has been alcoholic beverages. Iconic American brands like Jack Daniel's and Jim Beam faced swift backlash as liquor control boards in provinces such as Ontario and Quebec suspended orders. This move effectively wiped out $150 million in annual U.S. whiskey exports to Canada. Similarly, California wines, which once dominated 22% of Canada's $1.1 billion imported wine market, saw a dramatic 40% drop in sales as retailers and restaurants pivoted toward European and domestic alternatives. As a result, Brown-Forman, the parent company of Jack Daniel's, reported a 12% decline in North American revenue during the first quarter of 2025, directly attributing the dip to Canadian tariffs. Beyond alcoholic beverages, the automotive sector faces its own set of challenges. The automotive industry has been no less affected. Tesla was excluded from Canada's rebate program, which offers consumers up to $5,000 for electric vehicle purchases, leading to an 18% drop in its Canadian sales in early 2025. On a broader scale, Canada's imposition of a 25% tariff on U.S.-made auto parts has disrupted supply chains. Michigan-based parts supplier BorgWarner reported a $200 million revenue shortfall due to cancelled Canadian contracts. Meanwhile, Ford and General Motors are also seeing declining demand in the Canadian market, where consumers are increasingly favoring European and Asian automakers. Considering the U.S. exported $56 billion in vehicles and parts to Canada in 2023, the sector could lose up to $8 billion annually if current tariffs persist. Agriculture and food exports have also taken a substantial hit. U.S. pork and beef exports to Canada, worth $4.5 billion in 2023, have declined by 15% as Canadian importers turn to suppliers in the European Union and South America. Washington state apples, which previously accounted for 60% of Canada's imported apple market, have seen a 30% sales drop, spurred by a strategic expansion in British Columbia's domestic orchard production. With these trends accelerating, the U.S. agricultural sector risks losing its long-held position as Canada's largest food supplier, a status it held with 55% of the food import market share. The apparel and fashion sector is feeling the effects as well. U.S. brands such as Levi's, Ralph Lauren, and Nike are reporting sales declines of 20 to 25% in Canada. In response, Canadian retailers like Aldo and Call It Spring have doubled down on promoting locally made homegrown collections, reducing their orders from U.S. manufacturers. U.S. apparel exports to Canada, which totaled $9.8 billion in 2023, are now projected to fall by $2 billion in 2025. Impact extends beyond physical goods to digital services. Streaming platforms like Netflix and Disney Plus are experiencing a wave of cancellations, with Canadians increasingly turning to homegrown alternatives like CBC Gem and other local platforms. Hulu, already unavailable in Canada, has also lost revenue through decreased VPN user subscriptions. Overall, U.S. streaming giants are projected to lose between 5 to 10% of their Canadian subscriber base, roughly 1 million users, translating to approximately $100 million in lost annual revenue. In the energy sector, Canada has introduced a 10% retaliatory tariff on U.S. energy imports, leading to reduced cross-border pipeline shipments. The Alberta government is actively incentivizing local refineries to avoid American crude. As a result, U.S. energy exports to Canada, which totaled $85 billion in 2023, are expected to decline by $5 to $7 billion annually, posing serious implications for Gulf Coast refiners and related supply networks. Tourism and hospitality have also suffered substantial setbacks. Major U.S. hotel chains such as Marriott and Hilton report a 25% drop in Canadian bookings in popular destinations like Las Vegas and Orlando. Airlines, including Delta and United, have responded by cutting 15% of flights along Canada-U.S. routes. According to the U.S. Travel Association, even a 10% decline in Canadian travel could lead to a $2.1 billion drop in tourism spending and cost approximately 14,000 American jobs. Finally, The boycott is also affecting consumer electronics and general retail. High-profile American brands like Apple and HP are seeing reduced demand as Canadian consumers delay upgrades or switch to non-US alternatives. Retailers such as Home Depot and Wayfair are also reporting slower sales in Canada as shoppers increasingly prioritize local brick-and-mortar stores. Altogether, U.S. consumer goods exporters are facing a challenging situation. Projected 10 to 15% revenue decline in Canada, amounting to an estimated $6 billion in annual losses. Let's take a quick pause. If you've enjoyed the video so far, could we ask a small favor? Hitting the like button helps us reach a broader audience, and sharing your thoughts or feedback in the comments makes an even bigger impact. Thank you for watching. Now let's dive back in. Having seen the toll on U.S. industries, let's now turn to the financial implications for Canadian businesses. The financial impact on Canadian businesses has been multifaceted, revealing both vulnerabilities and emerging opportunities in the wake of deteriorating cross-border relations. For many, the downturn in travel to the United States has translated into direct losses. Sectors closely tied to U.S.-bound travel, such as cross-border retail, currency exchange services, and tour operators specializing in American destinations, have faced sharp revenue declines. These businesses, once dependent on the steady stream of Canadians traveling south for shopping, leisure, or business, are now scaling back operations and, in some cases, downsizing staff. At the same time, the retreat from U.S. travel has fueled a notable rise in domestic tourism within Canada. National campaigns encouraging Canadians to support homegrown destinations have gained momentum, most notably with former Prime Minister Justin Trudeau's appeal to choose Canada. This message resonated widely, prompting a redirection of vacation spending toward local alternatives. As a result, national parks, historical landmarks, and cultural sites across the country have seen surging attendance. Canadian resorts and hotels have reported higher occupancy rates, and local tourism-dependent economies have enjoyed a revitalization that is helping offset losses from declining cross-border activity. For businesses in hospitality, travel, and recreation, this inward shift has offered a timely and much-needed cushion. However, the financial fallout extends beyond tourism and into core industrial sectors, most notably automotive manufacturing. The Canadian auto industry, deeply intertwined with the North American supply chain, has felt the shockwaves of escalating trade disruptions. One of the most high-profile consequences was the temporary closure of the Stellantis assembly plant in Windsor, Ontario. This key facility, responsible for producing models such as the Chrysler Pacifica and Dodge Charger Daytona, is undergoing a 2-week shutdown beginning April 7, 2025. The decision, triggered by tariff-related uncertainty and increased component costs, has directly affected approximately 4,500 workers at the Windsor site. Stellantis also announced a similar suspension at its Tuca assembly plant in Mexico, which manufactures the Jeep Compass and Wagoneer S. The impact, however, radiates far beyond these assembly lines across the broader supply chain. An estimated 12,000 workers at Canadian parts manufacturing facilities have experienced layoffs or reduced hours. The interconnected nature of the North American auto industry means that any disruption at the border sends shockwaves through both upstream suppliers and downstream manufacturers. The shutdown has sparked growing concerns among industry leaders and local officials about the long-term competitiveness and stability of Canada's automotive sector if current trade tensions persist. So, how have these tensions influenced people's views across Canada? Let's dive into the changing public sentiment. Canadian public opinion toward the United States has shifted markedly in recent months, largely in response to the rhetoric and policies of former U.S. President Donald Trump. Historically, Canadians have viewed the United States as a close and reliable partner. However, recent surveys show a dramatic erosion in that sentiment. As of early 2025, only 33% of Canadians express a favorable view of the U.S., a decline of nearly 20 percentage points from previous years. This downturn is particularly stark among younger Canadians aged 18 to 34, who now view the US in a similarly unfavorable light as countries like China or Russia. Further reflecting this shift, 27% of Canadians now classify the United States as an enemy country, while only 30% continue to see it as an ally, and another 27% regard it as neutral. In contrast, just 1% of Americans label Canada an enemy, underscoring a growing asymmetry in mutual perception. This decline in trust is not occurring in isolation. The European Union now enjoys a 75% favorability rating among Canadians, while Mexico has also overtaken the US in trust and public approval. These changing attitudes suggest a broader realignment in Canadian public opinion.